That will do it. What a performance from Karolina Muchova.
Good luck.
Nice respect there. Tough day for Alexandra EALA.
The WTA called an emergency meeting the morning after Alex EALA lost in Miami. The numbers were bad. Sponsors were calling. Broadcast partners were threatening renegotiations. And when they needed someone to point at, they chose the 20-year-old who had outsold every single player in the tournament combined. The memo leaked and then everything fell apart for the people who wrote it. Be honest. Do you think the WTA would have blamed a European player the same way they blamed Alex EALA for Miami's financial shortfall? Drop your take in the comments. Let's start with the meeting.
Obviously, in the fourth round back here in Miami, and you'll get to face Karolina Muchova, I believe, for the first time. Just what are your thoughts on, playing her? She won in Doha a month ago. Just, your initial thoughts on playing her.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I haven't thought about it much. I haven't had time to think about it much, but she's obviously a great player and is doing really well. A couple of years back, I watched one of her finals, and I was really impressed. So to be put in a position to compete against her is a real privilege and gonna be a test for sure.
You like to mention the phrase "spoonful of gratitude" and how you kind of embraced, that throughout the past year, and this, was a place where it kind of made your breakthrough moment. Just kind of when you mention that phrase, where does that gratitude, come from?
I think the fact I recognize that I'm also blessed to be living my life, or the life that I live. Of course, I've earned it. I've definitely earned it. I've put in the work. That's not to be questioned. But then again, I think it's so important to be grateful for what you have. I've witnessed poverty, in surroundings, or in my surroundings. So I don't take for granted anything, especially family and my team and just the opportunities I'm able to have. So that's why I make it a point always.
March 24th, 2026, Hard Rock Stadium. At 9 in the morning, WTA executives walked into a conference room expecting a routine post-tournament financial review. They anticipated going over ticket sales, merchandise revenue, broadcast ratings, and the usual breakdown that follows a major event. Instead, they were met with a shocking reality: a $4.7 million shortfall compared to projections. The 2026 Miami Open, which had been expected to become the most profitable edition in the tournament's history, had fallen significantly short of expectations.
Well, superb. You have to say 10 out of 10 for a performance today. Whether EALA was restricted or not, we do not know. She had new strapping on her thigh today. And bless her, she looks very emotional, very disappointed. But remember, the same thing happened to Muchova in Indian Wells. Won only 2 games, 11-2. Same scoreline today, but Muchova in the winner's camp and the first player into the quarterfinals of Miami 2026, having disposed of the number 31 seed from the Philippines, 6-love, 6-2.
Well, impressive performance coming from Karolina Muchova.
Sponsors began asking for refunds. Broadcast partners started pushing to renegotiate their contracts. And inside that conference room, a spreadsheet was already pointing to a single reason. One 20-year-old Filipina had been eliminated in the 4th round instead of making a deep run, and the entire financial model built around her presence collapsed the moment she left the court. Within hours, a memo was drafted. By the time it leaked, the tennis world was in shock, not because of the financial loss, but because of who the WTA had chosen to hold responsible. The memo stated that relying too heavily on one player's popularity had created an unstable revenue model. When that player failed to go beyond the 4th round, the structure fell apart. Then came the line that changed everything. It claimed that while Alex EALA's popularity was undeniable, her inability to consistently reach the later stages of tournaments posed a systemic risk to WTA events built around her drawing power. Read that again. The WTA had labeled Alex EALA a systemic risk. The same Alex EALA whose merchandise made up 57% of all tournament sales, more than every other player combined. The same player who drove a 48% increase in ticket sales leading up to the event. The same Alex EALA whose broadcast numbers across the Philippines and the global Filipino community broke records. And yet, she was described as a liability. The confidence required to write that in an official memo while looking at those numbers is something worth questioning. Now, consider what the memo chose to ignore, because the $4.7 million shortfall did not happen without context. The people in that room knew exactly what they were leaving out when they made it about EALA. The rain. March 15th was completely washed out, with all qualifying matches cancelled and practice sessions scrapped. March 18th saw a full shutdown, with 37 matches cancelled across both ATP and WTA draws. Players waited for hours in locker rooms for conditions that never improved. Venus Williams was waiting. Matteo Berrettini was waiting. Stefanos Tsitsipas was waiting. An entire day of competition was wiped out. The financial damage from those 2 days alone was estimated at over $2 million in lost concessions, merchandise, and ticket refunds. Insurance covered some of it, but not everything. The memo never mentioned the weather. Then there was the issue of sponsorship deals. Several major sponsors had taken out performance-based insurance policies, essentially betting that EALA's popularity would keep her on court until at least the semifinals. These policies were based on her ranking of 29 when agreements were signed. But by the time the tournament began, her live ranking had dropped to 51 after losing 390 semifinal points from her 2025 Miami run. The financial assumptions were already outdated before the first match even started. The memo never mentioned that either. Then there were the broadcast agreements. Networks paid premium rates for exclusive rights to EALA's matches, expecting her to reach at least the quarterfinals. When she exited in the fourth round, those partners saw a 23% drop in projected viewership hours and immediately raised concerns about compensation. Again, the memo said nothing about how those deals were structured. What the memo did repeat, clearly and directly, was EALA's failure to go deep enough, her inability to turn popularity into results, and her supposed instability as a commercial asset. A 20-year-old who played a 3-hour match against Laura Siegemund, handled multiple rain delays, dealt with scheduling chaos, and competed against Karolina Muchova, the 13th seed and reigning Stuttgart Open champion, until the final point was labeled a systemic risk. The correct word here is not oversight. It is scapegoating. The reaction across the tennis world was immediate. Filipino fans who had traveled internationally, many specifically for this event, responded strongly online. The gap between what they witnessed during the tournament and what the WTA wrote in that memo was impossible to ignore. She sold out stadiums, overwhelmed ticket systems, and outsold every other player combined. Yet she was blamed for the financial shortfall after losing in the round of 16. Players began to speak out. Jessica Pegula said clearly that it was unfair to put that responsibility on Alex, noting her ability to draw crowds and carry herself professionally. Coco Gauff was even more direct, pointing out that a 20-year-old competing at that level should not be held responsible for a flawed financial model. Then Billie Jean King, founder of the WTA, weighed in. Her message was careful but firm. The organization was created to support players, not to make them scapegoats for internal failures. When the founder of the organization publicly questions its actions, it goes beyond a simple PR issue. It becomes a deeper institutional problem. The backlash grew so strong that the WTA released a follow-up statement within days, claiming the memo was part of a broader financial review and was never meant to blame an individual player. They expressed regret for any misunderstanding, but calling it a misunderstanding did little to change how it was received. The wording in the memo was clear, and the damage had already been done. The response felt less like an apology and more like an attempt to manage the fallout. Looking at the numbers makes the situation even more uncomfortable for the WTA. The tournament generated $42.5 million in revenue against a projection of $47.2 million. Yes, there was a gap, but $42.5 million is still a strong financial outcome by any standard. The real issue was an overly ambitious projection built on the assumption that a developing player would consistently reach the final stages of every event. As one sports economist explained, the WTA had failed to diversify its financial model. Building a $47 million expectation around a single player is not a player's fault, it is a basic business mistake. The core issue was never EALA's fourth-round exit. The real problem was a financial structure that had no backup plan for a very realistic outcome. When that outcome happened, the organization needed someone to blame, and they chose the player who had contributed the most to their revenue. Meanwhile, EALA had already left Miami and returned to the Philippines, away from the media and the noise. When the memo became public, she was at home. Her team released a short statement saying she was focused on recovery and preparing for the clay season, with no comment on matters outside her control. That response spoke for itself. She did not need to defend anything. The numbers spoke for her. The sold-out crowd spoke for her. The merchandise sales spoke for her. The reaction from Billie Jean King spoke for her. She left Miami with ranking points, prize money, and valuable experience competing at a high level. She left as the central figure around whom the tournament had been built, which is why she had nothing to apologize for. Those close to her said she was hurt, not because the criticism was valid, but because she had given everything to the event and represented the Philippines with pride, only to be labeled a liability in return. Now the clay season approaches, with events like the Upper Austria Ladies Linz Open, Madrid, Rome, and Roland Garros ahead. Clay is where EALA developed much of her game at the Rafa Nadal Academy, learning patience, movement, and strategy. It offers her a different rhythm compared to hard courts. While her record against Czech players, including Muchova, has been challenging, Clay provides a new opportunity. The memo will eventually fade within the organization, as these things often do. But what will not fade are the fans who traveled across the world, the sold-out arenas, the merchandise sales, and the energy she brought to the tournament. None of that was reflected in the memo, but all of it was real. The WTA built a financial model around Alex EALA, failed to meet its own projections, and then placed the blame on her. The entire tennis world saw it happen.